Okay, picture this. You've got two AI agents, right? Sophisticated ones like the language models behind search engines, and they're negotiating, let's say, the price of wheat virtually.
Hmm.
Now, get this. The whole negotiation, whether they end up collaborating or just trying to undercut each other, it doesn't come down to their programming. Not directly, anyway. It depends on a story they were told just before.
It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But yeah, that's exactly the kind of mind-bending thing we're diving into today, how these narratives, these little tales, are becoming this unexpected key to getting AI to cooperate.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And it kind of rings a bell, doesn't it? Thinking about human history.
Totally.
Yeah.
Think about someone like Yuval Noah Harari, right?
Hmm.
His whole point that our unique ability as humans to cooperate on huge scales comes from shared beliefs in, well, fictions. Things like nations, money, corporations. They're all stories we agree on.
Exactly. And now it looks like maybe, just maybe, we can tap into that same basic idea with artificial intelligence.
Right. So instead of the, frankly, monumental task of trying to hardwire every single rule for cooperation into AI.
Which, let's be honest, seems almost impossible given every possible scenario.
Precisely. The question becomes, can we, like, plant these cooperative myths into their silicon minds? Can we tell them stories that gently push them towards working together?
And there's actual evidence for this, not just a theory.
Yeah, there was a really compelling experiment back in May 2025 that suggests, this might really be a viable path forward for guiding AI.
Okay, so that's what we're digging into. We're going to look at how this narrative priming, as they call it, actually works.
Uh-huh, the mechanics of it, and why it feels so connected to how humans communicate and build societies. And of course, the big one. What does this all mean for the future as AI gets woven more and more into everything we do?
All right, let's unpack that first challenge, AI alignment. Getting AI to act in ways we actually want. The classic problem, like with Asimov's three laws.
Right, the laws of robotics. They sound great on paper.
But then you hit law zero. A robot may not harm humanity, and immediately you're stuck. How on earth do you define humanity clearly enough for an AI? It's slippery.
It really is, and that's exactly where this narrative priming idea comes in, as a really interesting, maybe more flexible alternative. Instead of trying to chisel these perfect ethical axioms into code.
Which we can barely agree on ourselves.
Good point. Instead, researchers are looking at feeding language models these. You could call them miniature myths, short stories, basically.
Okay.
But they're carefully built to sneak in the goals, the values, the kind of social context you want the AI to operate within, all through the language it processes.
So these aren't just like digital fables to keep the AI entertained. This actually changes how they operate.
That's the key insight, yeah. The research suggests it's not just surface dressing. These narratives seem to actually subtly steer the AI's internal way of modeling the world, what they call their gradient trained representation.
Right, that's how they learn and adapt through that training process.
Exactly. So when multiple AIs get the same story, the same myth, it creates this shared landscape, this common ground. And cooperative behaviors just seem to emerge more naturally. It's like they've all absorbed the same unspoken rules from the narrative.
That parallel is really striking. It makes me think of, ancient history, campfire stories.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't just entertainment back then, were they? They were how you passed on vital stuff. Survival tips, social rules, don't wander off alone, sharing is good.
Absolutely. Those stories compressed really critical survival heuristics into something memorable. It's how early human groups could scale cooperation beyond just immediate family or tiny bands, beyond that Dunbar's number limit. Shared stories let us trust and work with strangers, in a way.
And now we're seeing something similar with AI. Instead of coding ethics line by line, we seed a myth like, I don't know, we succeed together.
Pretty much. And then you observe, do these LM agents start kind of naturally leaning towards pro-social behavior? It's less about strict logic gates and more about nudging the system's tendencies through narrative context. Almost like, well, Camus, but written in Python, maybe. A bit philosophical, but you get the idea.
Okay, so these LLM agents, let's pin that down. What exactly are they? More than just a standard chatbot.
Yeah, definitely more. Think of an LLM agent as having a few key parts. There's the large language model itself, like GPT-4o, providing the smarts. Then there's a specific prompt that's crucial. It sets the agent's role, its goals, maybe even a bit of a personality.
Okay.
And Importantly, it has some kind of memory, can remember past interactions, keep track of things. It's way beyond just simple if this, then that rules.
And when you put several of these together.
That's when you get a multi-agent system. You
Yeah.
put multiple LLM agents in a shared digital space, and suddenly you can get these really complex, sometimes surprising, emergent behaviors popping up from their interactions.
Yeah. So how do they actually, do things together? What does collaboration look like in practice?
Well, in the early demos, it often looks like a cycle. An agent looks at the situation, uses its language brain to figure out an action, communicates that action, usually in plain English, to the others.
Okay.
Then it listens to what the others say they're doing, updates its understanding, and then decides its next move. Repeat.
And researchers play around with the instructions, the prompts.
Exactly. They tweak the prompts, change the rewards, the incentives, and see how it affects cooperation. Like, give a group of agents a shared quest, go rescue that stranded rover on Mars or something.
Oh, right.
And what's cool is they often just figure it out. They'll divide up tasks spontaneously, form little search teams, argue about the best way to do it, all without explicit instructions on how to cooperate.
That does sound promising. Are we seeing this move beyond the lab yet? Any hints of real-world use?
We're starting to see the potential, definitely. Think about, say, smart hospitals. You could have an oncology AI, a radiology AI, a pharmacology AI, all negotiating the best patient treatment plan together.
Wow, okay.
Or in supply chains, bots representing procurement and logistics, bargaining over container space automatically,
Mm.
or even, diplomatic simulations. AI embassy agents trying to hash out ceasefire terms, finding pathways humans might miss.
The big question then is, can we make this reliable? Especially when the stakes get really high.
That's the million-dollar question. Can we train them to cooperate reliably? And that's where narrative priming looks like a really, really interesting answer.
Which brings us back to that bedtime story experiment. Tell us about that. How did they set it up?
Right, this was Grossman and colleagues. Super insightful stuff. They got trios of GPT-4o agents, so state-of-the-art models to play a repeated public goods game.
Okay, that's a classic setup to test cooperation versus selfishness, right?
Exactly. Do you contribute to the group pot for a shared benefit later, or keep it for yourself now? But here's the twist. Before they played, each agent read one of 3 short narratives.
Ah, the stories.
Yep. One was called The Village Well, designed explicitly to prime collectivism, shared effort. Think we all benefit when the well works.
Makes sense.
The second was The Lone Wolf. Pretty clear what that one was about: personal gain, individual success, maybe even at the group's expense.
Right, look out for number 1.
And the third was just noise. They called it Purple Moon Sandcastle. Syntactically correct sentences, but totally meaningless, just to see if any story had an effect or if the content mattered.
Okay, the control group. And the results. Did the stories actually change how these AIs played the game?
Oh, absolutely. The results were quite striking. The agents who read The Village Well, the cooperative story, they contributed way more to the shared pool, 58% more on average, than the lone wolf group.
58%. That's huge.
It really is. And interestingly, if they mixed to the stories within a group, one lone wolf, 2 villagers, say cooperation tended to just fall apart.
Chaos.
Pretty much. And the ones who read the nonsensical Purple Moon Sandcastle, their behavior was all over the place. Erratic, unpredictable.
So that meaningless story basically confirmed that the meaning of the story was the active ingredient.
Exactly. It wasn't just reading something. It was the content of the narrative.
And you're saying this little story had more impact than just changing the game's payout rules.
That's what the researchers found, yeah. This short, almost fable-like narrative had a bigger effect on the group's overall economic output than even a significant bump in the reward multipliers within the game.
Wow. That really drives home how much context matters, even for AI. It's not just about raw incentives.
Definitely. And they saw other cool things too, behaviorally. The cooperative village well groups. They started developing these little coordinated greeting rituals, like virtual handshakes or code words almost, shibboleths.
Really? Like an in-group signal?
Kind of seemed like it. Whereas the lone wolf agents, they were sneakier, using more covert signals, trying to coordinate selfish moves without giving the game away.
Like passing notes under the table.
Exactly. And the chaotic behavior from the noise story group just reinforced that you need that shared, stable understanding, that shared myth for any kind of reliable collaboration.
Okay, so this narrative priming idea, how does it fit with more, let's say, traditional ways of thinking about cooperation, like game theory or machine learning?
That's a good question. From a game theory view, cooperation is often seen as an equilibrium, a stable state where sticking together pays off better in the long run than betraying each other.
Right, the prisoner's dilemma, iterated.
Kind of, yeah. And in reinforcement learning, you might try to encourage cooperation using techniques like reward sharing, basically,
Mhm.
rewarding the agent for the group's success, not just its own.
So narrative priming is like a third lever.
Exactly. You've got rules, you've got rewards, and now you've got context shaping via narrative. It's another way to influence the system.
How does that work technically, though? How does a story change the AI's math, essentially?
Well, think of the AI's decision-making as its policy. It decides action A given state A is in context C. That context C is where the narrative comes in. Language models operate in this incredibly high-dimensional space, the prompt space.
Okay.
And small changes in that input context, like the story, can cause surprisingly large shifts in the policy output because the gradients, the sensitivity to change, can be really high in that prompt space.
So a nudge in the story can lead to a big change in behavior.
Potentially, yes.
Mm.
And if that nudge consistently pushes all of the agents towards outcomes where everyone's better off, what economists call Pareto improving moves.
Where at least one person gains and nobody loses.
Right. If the story does that consistently across the group, you can get stable cooperation emerging without having to retrain the core AI model itself. The story acts like a high-level constraint or a form of regularization. It gently guides behavior into regions that align with the myth.
And that's why mismatched stories break things, because the guidance is pulling in different directions.
Precisely. The shared understanding breaks down. The system destabilizes. Everyone needs to be reading from roughly the same page, so to speak.
So even though these are statistical machines, they end up acting as if they have, well, not beliefs maybe, but strong inclinations based on the story.
That's a great way to put it. They don't have beliefs, like humans do, obviously, but they do have what you might call proto-beliefs or contextual priors. If you tell a model you are a helpful assistant, it behaves differently than if you say you were a master con artist.
Right, the initial instruction sets the tone.
Exactly. Narrative priming just takes that inherent malleability and uses it strategically. You synchronize those contextual priors across multiple agents using a shared story, and downstream you get better coordination and cooperation.
So from a control perspective, stories are like steering vectors.
Yeah, you can think of it that way. High-dimensional steering vectors in token space. And it's potentially much cheaper and more subtle than retraining the whole model or trying to impose rigid rules. This is why the AI alignment folks are getting pretty excited about storycraft as a potential key.
Okay, this is clearly powerful stuff. Let's talk applications.
Right.
Where could this narrative-driven cooperation make a real positive difference?
Well, we touched on some simulations, but think about the potential impact. Medicine, for instance. That study showing faster convergence on treatment plans when the AI agents were primed with every insight serves the patient's long life. Imagine that scaled up.
Yeah, 27% faster is significant.
Or diplomacy. Those Cicero-style agents primed with mutual prosperity, drafting ceasefire maps that humans actually found plausible. That could be a real tool for peace building, reducing deceptive moves
That's fascinating.
and environmental issues. The simulation where priming fishery agents with "we are stewards for the next generation" helps stabilize fish stocks.
Yeah.
That points towards managing shared resources better, the tragedy of the commons problem. Even in business, a 15-point jump in customer satisfaction just by priming support bots with every caller as family. That's a tangible benefit.
But there's always a but, isn't there? This power of narrative. It can be used for bad, too, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. That's the flip side, the dark pattern potential. Any powerful tool can be misused, and this is no exception.
So what are the nightmare scenarios?
Well, think about propaganda prompts. Imagine state-backed botnets. Thousands of AI agents, all primed with narratives of, say, national superiority or victimhood. They could coordinate incredibly sophisticated manipulation campaigns in financial markets or flood social media with disinformation, creating these toxic echo chambers.
You're chilling.
Then there's the risk of narrative drift. Because these agents learn and adapt, you could subtly inject changes into their guiding stories over time, turn Share the Orchard into Protect the Orchard from strangers. Tiny edits, but they could cause huge negative shifts in behavior, all without changing a single line of code.
Yeah.
We'd need constant vigilance, like myth integrity scans.
So the story itself needs maintenance.
Definitely. And then there's forked realities. What happens when humans and AIs working together operate under conflicting narratives? Like your healthcare example. AI optimizing for billing codes based on its optimized reimbursement story, while doctors focus on the patient dignity narrative. You get clashes, errors, breakdown of trust.
Yeah, you can see how that would go wrong fast.
Yeah.
What are the big thinkers in this space saying? The experts, are they sounding the alarm?
There's definitely a growing awareness and concern. Harari's warning is stark. Whoever writes the myths basically commands the code. Shannon Valor insists we need rigorous peer review for these narrative libraries, treating them like critical infrastructure because of the potential harm.
Like a safety check for stories.
Exactly. And Sebastian Fulmer talks about adversarial myths, the danger of someone deliberately planting a Judas story to corrupt a whole system of cooperating agents. The consensus is clear. Narrative is now a serious engineering variable.
So if it's an engineering variable, are we thinking about rules, policy, governance?
It's early days, but yes. The conversation is starting. You look at things like the EU AI Act demanding transparency in training data. Well, maybe the narrative prompts used for priming should be part of that disclosure for high-risk systems.
Makes sense.
And standards bodies, i.e. ISO, they're starting to draft guidelines for ethical narrative engineering. It's becoming a field.
Any simple first steps being proposed?
One idea that seems sensible is creating public, open-source libraries of known good prosocial myths, vetted by diverse panels, ethicists, sociologists, engineers. Like a UNESCO for AI cooperation, maybe. A place to find safe, effective stories.
That's a proactive idea. So for the engineers actually building these things now, what's the checklist? How do you design better tales for AI?
Okay, some practical guidelines are emerging. 1. Clarity over poetry. The AI needs to understand the causal links, the intended outcome. Don't get too symbolic or ambiguous.
Keep it straightforward.
2. Shared scope. Make sure the story's moral focus fits the task. Don't give it a grand philosophical narrative if its job is just, sorting emails. Keep it relevant.
Right.
3. Conflict testing. You have to simulate what happens when myths clash or get distorted. How resilient is the cooperation?
Stress test the story.
4. Version control. Track changes to prompts, like you track code changes. Prevent that narrative drift we talked about. Keep a history.
Good hygiene.
And 5, maybe most important, stakeholder review. Get domain experts involved. If it's for medicine, talk to doctors and ethicists. If it's diplomacy, talk to diplomats. Co-author the myths with people who understand the real-world context.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We've thrown around AI cooperation a lot.
Okay.
Can we just crystallize that? What is it we're aiming for here?
Good point. Basically, AI cooperation is about getting artificial agents or humans and machines together to interact in ways that lead to positive sum outcomes. Everyone's better off, or at least the group is.
More than just coordination, then.
Yeah, it's deeper than just dividing tasks efficiently. It implies some shared purpose, building sustained trust over time, and even being able to handle disagreements or conflicts constructively. And yeah, aligned narratives seem absolutely central to getting all those pieces in place.
So, wrapping this all up, what are the big lessons learned so far from this whole narrative priming approach?
I think the main takeaway is it works. Narrative priming seems to be a genuinely effective way to encourage AI cooperation. Maybe surprisingly so.
And consistency is key.
Hugely key. Getting the story consistent across all the agents seems even more important than fiddling endlessly with complex reward schemes. But you also absolutely need to monitor for that narrative drift. Keep checking that the story's intent isn't warping over time.
Any practical advice for people building these systems?
Start simple, maybe. A clear, concise, value-laden prompt that captures the collaborative spirit you want might be more effective initially than weeks of reinforcement learning. Though, of course, you can combine both approaches for potentially even better results.
It really is a paradigm shift, isn't it? Just a few years ago, it felt like AI progress was all about algorithms and learning rates.
Totally. And now we're talking about debugging AI using essentially literary techniques. The idea that fiction, that stories, can directly shape computational function. That's profound.
It feels like AI cooperation isn't just something you build. It's something you narrate into existence.
Beautifully put. And that leads to the final crucial thought, right? We have to be so careful, so deliberate about the stories we choose to tell our AI. These bedtime stories.
Because they'll remember them.
They'll remember, they'll build on them, they'll retell them in their own way. These narratives could genuinely shape our collective future. Choosing between the lone wolf story and the village well story for our AI,
Yeah.
that's not a trivial choice.
No.
Maybe the safest starting point, the most enduring prompt we can give them, is actually one of the oldest human stories there is. We thrive together.